With 500,000 new troops and 1,800 new tanks, the Russian offensive in eastern Ukraine, the much anticipated springtime offensive, has already begun. And there will be a few economic considerations. But first, I want to get to a whole bunch of headlines that are really relevant, time sensitive, that we're going to talk about right now. Amid persistent inflation, 54% of Americans are using savings to pay for everyday expenses. That's according to CNBC, and I'll show you a chart from this article. The share of household income going toward consumer debt is at pre-pandemic levels. So it's just more of what you already know. The economy is suffering, it's weakening more than they let on in the news. So consumers are taking on more debt, taking money out of savings just to pay for typical day-to-day items. But speaking of fiscal issues, the U.S. will default on its debt between July and September if Congress doesn't raise the debt ceiling, the CBO says. Yes, but we've known this for a long time, years and years leading up to it. They're not fixing the issue. They're not fixing the problem. That's why the debt ceiling will just be an ongoing thing again and again and again until the entire system just breaks down and seizes up. How do you think this is going to end? What do you think is going to happen when we live off of debt and take the easy solutions just to pay the debt down by raising the debt ceiling and then create new money to do it? From the good news files, we saw an increase in retail spending. Retail sales jumped 3% in January, smashing expectations despite inflation increase. Retail sales rose 3% in January, easily topping the 1.9% Dow Jones estimate, the Commerce Department reported on Wednesday. Food service and drinking places, motor vehicle and parts dealers, and furniture stores led the sales increases. Another bright spot on all this terrible news: Homebuilder sentiment in February improved by the biggest amount in a decade. America's home builders are becoming more bullish about the housing market. The National Association of Home Builders and the Wells Fargo Housing Market Index rose by the highest amount month to month in 10 years. Do I think that means we're out of the woods here? I still expect, and I'll tell you right now, that nothing's changed. The housing market's going to have a lot of pressure against it going forward that will build and build. And like I always tell you guys, just wait. Same thing with gold. People worry if the gold price goes down or if it's not performing yet. Just wait. Everything will play out in time, exactly as it's meant to. This is from CNN. The federal government will be unable to fully pay its obligation sometime between July and September if Congress doesn't address the debt limit before then. That's according to the Congressional Budget Office. In other words, that's when the agency expects the Treasury Department will exhaust its ability to borrow additional funds using extraordinary measures. Do you remember when the debt ceiling was a problem at first? Not at first, but recently. And Janet Yellen saying, don't worry, we have extraordinary measures. Okay, great, I feel better. So we go through the extraordinary measures and then those run out. At no point is anyone considering dealing with this issue. And it's kind of freaking me out because it's getting worse and worse and worse. There's one way this is going to end. All these macro events and economic events will have effects and impacts, and I'm also showing them to you to demonstrate the situation we're in economically. But even this advance of Russia, this springtime offensive of Russia in eastern Ukraine, that's going to have major impacts on you as well. It's a pretty significant macro event. And I don't like talking about it from an economic standpoint or an investing standpoint, because it's cringy and gross to think about how awful it is, the war that's going on there, all the fighting, and then to look at it from a financial perspective feels kind of gross to me. The way I see it, these are things that are happening, and there will be results of that. So if you wind up making a few dollars because you see how it's playing out and you position yourself well, then all the power to you, because this horrible thing is going to be happening anyway. You might as well try and benefit from it in the sense of helping the people that you care about, helping yourself out financially. What's going to happen with this offensive? Some of the things that will happen is more of what we saw before the war first broke out. But there will be war premiums on things like oil, and in fact, even the availability of energy. There'll be risk premiums on things like gold, That will drive prices higher as this expands. But I don't believe it'll be anything more extreme than what we saw in the first place when the war first broke out, except that I feel that we're at a very pivotal point of this conflict. Russia regathered their strength and they're putting together a big push. Most recent estimates is that the Russians are advancing by a couple hundred meters a week. Everything is saying that this war is actually expanding and heating up. It's getting more countries involved with it. You've got Germany sending more tanks and munitions. You've got Iran more and more involved. The Western powers are getting more and more involved. It's coming closer to a point where Russia either wins or loses. Ukraine either wins or loses. And what happens then? Have you thought about that ahead of time? What happens when Russia, if they start to lose? Do they up the stakes? Do they get more aggressive? And as we move closer and closer to World War III, keep in mind that whenever anything significant breaks out, a lot of satellites will be taken out of the sky immediately. Whether it's America doing it to other nations, or it's China doing it, or Russia doing it, all these countries have the capability of knocking satellites out of the air. And what is that going to mean? You're instantly going to be losing internet. How's that going to affect you in the first hour, in the first day, in the first week? Everything you think about the war in Ukraine, I believe is about to get a lot worse. This will be the tipping point, the next few months. So I would encourage you not to be fatigued of the whole topic. If you think, oh, it's just the war in Ukraine that's going on there, and you think it'll just be more of the same, this is how people get caught on the wrong side of things. It is much more likely to become very significant in the next 6 months compared to what we've seen up until this point. The Russians have reinforced all their lines. Although they typically had a bad start to most of the fighting, they are making an advance now, turning the tides now. So what does the Western allies do about that? Do we get more and more involved? Of course we will. I would suggest that everyone gets some investment exposure to energy companies, things like oil, natural gas. I also would suggest you have exposure to things like gold because it's nature's insurance, and often in times of war, the worse the war gets, the higher the value of real money, which is gold. And if we lose some satellites, that changes the entire economic landscape that you're looking at. The companies that provide the internet, the companies that rely on internet, which is all of them, they will be under a different kind of pressure with one missile strike from Russia, North Korea, China. That'll just be an extension of the cyber warfare that we've been seeing. That's the aspect of cyber warfare we have not yet seen. That affects every aspect of the entire economy that's around you right now. These are just some of the macro things that we're looking at for the world famous Stock Pick newsletter that we publish.